Thanks, Prashant. Today I'm going to speak about CRDMO, which basically stands for Contract Research, Development and Manufacturing Outsourcing, which we do believe is a scalable growth opportunities from an Indian pharma perspective. So just to talk about first on the Indian healthcare, while it's a large market, if you look at India healthcare today stands for around $145 billion, and probably one of the fastest growing segments among many segments in the country. Yet when you look at in terms of whether we talk about healthcare infrastructures or even the penetration of modern medicines, still I would say this industry is hugely underpenetrated compared to the standards which have been set by WHO in the emerging markets. Again, if you look at from a segment perspective, healthcare can be split into two sub-segments. We call it services, which is around $85 billion industry. Overall, India healthcare is growing between 10 to 12%. Services, which largely consist of hospitals, the largest segment of market, around $72 billion. Diagnostics, around $11 billion. And when you talk about manufacturing, which is around $60 billion kind of market as we speak. And within manufacturing, you see pharmaceutical manufacturing, which consists of both formulations and API, intermediates, etc., is around $50 billion. And medical devices is around $10 billion. Now, between manufacturing and services, there's an intersection of something called CRO, or Contract Research Outsourcing, or CDMO, which is Contract Drug Development and Manufacturing Outsourcing, which together, as we speak, works around $5 to $6 billion when we think about in terms of the total addressable market for Indian pharma companies. Now, if you look at Indian pharma, which today is known as pharmacy of the world, while already when we think about the vaccines, probably we are the leader, given that every second vaccines which is being consumed in the world are being manufactured by Indian companies. COVID-19 was a testament to our manufacturing capabilities as we stepped up during a time of crisis. Now, while we're talking about today on the CRDMO, in our view, the relevance of India in the global outsourcing trend would improve over the coming years, since given the service DNA advantage what we have, access to a large talent and treatment-named patient pool. We have already seen that in the IT industry, where India today has established global dominance and continue to gain market share. And we think CRDMO would be the next big growth opportunity for the Indian companies. A little busy slide, but what I'm trying to focus here is who these CXOs are and what really they do. So historically, the drug discovery is a pretty long process and which consists of multiple steps, right from preclinical to clinical development and finally commercializations. And in the past, there used to be a specialized service providers for each of those service segments. But as we've been seeing the recent trends, where countries or companies are emerging more like as an integrated players, and they would like to provide end-to-end services under one roof. And probably we'll talk a little more in details as we move forward. Again, this slide basically focuses in terms of the addressable market opportunities for CRO, CDMOs, or so-called CRDMO. If you look at overall, the size of the pie is around $155 billion, while the global pharmaceutical industries are likely to grow early single digit to mid single digit kind of range. But when you look at the next 8 years, forecast for the CXO industries are around 11.5%. So this industry is likely to grow almost 2 times than what the global pharmaceutical industry is likely to be. As I indicated earlier, India CDO or CXO stands today at around $5 to $6 billion. When we look at this CXO, again, largely we can split that into 2 segments, CROs, which is Contract Research Outsourcing, and CDMO, which is largely development and manufacturing. And you can see the CRO is around $79 billion and CDMO is around $76 billion. Now, within CDMO, and which is likely to grow faster at 13%, you have the small molecules or the molecule which can be synthesized in the laboratories, and we'll speak a little more in terms of the difference between small molecule and the large molecules. But clearly, if you look at the point what I want to drive here, that biologics, which are the large and more complicated molecules, are likely to grow at a faster clip of 15 to 17%, and which is almost like 2.5, 3x to the overall pharmaceutical industry growth. This slide basically talks about the difference between small molecule and biologics. Well, small molecules are the molecules which can be synthesized or produced in the lab, while the biologics are made up of living cells like RNA, mRNAs, and DNAs, which are the living cells, and obviously they are very complicated and large protein chains. Just to put it in the layman language, like manufacturing a bicycle is equivalent to a small molecule drug, or like aspirin, then biologics or monoclonal antibody stands like you're manufacturing a private jet. So that talks about the kind of complexity what the large molecules or biologics stands for. Again, a little bit busy slides, basically talking about the whole drug development process, where if you look at in terms of the probability of success, that if a company starts with screening of more than 10,000 compounds at early drug discovery stage, only one drug is being commercialized or approved, and that's the kind of probability in terms of success. When you think about the time it takes in terms of developing that molecule, it's anywhere between 12 to 14 years. And once the molecule gets commercialized, the patent life or the finite life of the drug, where the drug developer or the innovators has to recoup the entire cost of development within that 8 to 10 years period. And hence, I think that turnaround time becomes very, very critical. And third is, if you look at over the last 40 years or 4 decades, because there are higher rate of failures, the drug development cost has gone up from $180 million in 1970s to $2.5 billion. And in order to de-risk their R&D, increase speed to market and faster turnaround time, and to reduce the cost, large and emerging biotech companies are now moving to more and more outsourcing kind of business models. Now, a couple of drivers which we would like to focus in terms of why the CDMO or CXOs are gaining or becoming much more relevant for the market. As we've been talking about biologics over the last few slides, today, if you look at biologics are gaining share, though small molecules are still relevant. 30% of the sales today in the global pharma market comes from the biologic drugs. But when you look at in terms of the incremental pipeline, which is in development, almost 45% of the drugs are coming from the biologics. And you can see the R&D spend on the top right-hand side, that the R&D spend on the biologics is going at much faster clip versus the total pipeline R&D spend. And if you look at in 2020 itself, 50% of the drugs which are being approved by the regulators in the US are from biologics. So obviously biologics are clearly getting the tractions. And given these biologic drugs are more complex structure, they require longer research timeline, and hence probably you need, I would say, dedicated and capable CXO or CDMO players who can obviously capture these growing opportunities in the CDMO space. The other key drivers for the growth is, again, the increasing importance of small and virtual biotech pharma companies. If you look at in 2021, almost, I would say, maybe 44 to 45% of the investment in the R&D has come from the companies which have virtually no infrastructures in terms of manufacturing or large R&Ds. they are probably being started by the scientists, either in the universities or maybe a group of small people coming out and starting, their development work from the small labs. And these are the people who are gaining much more importance. And by 2030, you will see more than 55% of the spend will be done by these small biotech pharma companies, which you can see that while the R&D spend on the top right-hand side by the large pharma company are likely to grow by 4.5%, but the small and virtual pharma company will have almost 11% kind of CAGR R&D spend. And these are the companies, again, they require the services of these CXOs, CDMOs, and CROs in terms of obviously doing the clinical trials and then getting into the commercialization of the molecule. And most of these small biotech companies largely have a focus in terms of asset-light model, and hence they are largely reliant on outsourcing. Another critical point I would like to highlight in terms of, again, the growing trends of drugs, which probably are being meant for the rare diseases. Now, you may have very limited number of patients for these drugs, but given that these drugs have got faster acceleration in terms of regulatory approvals, and there's a lower development cost, the share of orphan drugs in the overall pharma industry has gone up from 4% in 2000 to now 15% in 2022. Now, these are the molecules which are very novel in nature. Probably they require small volumes, but the value component is very, very high, that as these drugs comes with a very expensive price. But given that they are meant for the rare disease, there's a higher propensity of failure and or lower probability of success. And even the batch size are also relatively smaller. And it doesn't make sense for the pharma companies to put dedicated infrastructure for these kind of modalities, and hence increase outsourcing requirement. Now, this slide basically talks about that how the CXO helps in terms of bringing down the cost of development as well as faster turnaround and hence shorter clinical time. If you look at whether in preclinical or clinical, CXO companies in China or US offers maybe 30 to 60% lower cost versus the drugs which are being developed in the US or Europe. And they also shorten clinical time by 24 to 42%. Given that they have availability of large patient pool available, and you take it like this way, that if a drug has a finite life of around 9 to 10 years, and if a blockbuster drug, contribute around $1 billion kind of revenue in a year, and if you cut short the development time by 6 months, it leads to $500 million incremental revenue to the innovator. So innovator won't mind maybe spending, money in order to cut the, development time or faster turnaround time, and hence they, apart from their own resources, particularly of the large pharma company, even they also go for some of those, CXOs in order to develop or have more molecules in the pipeline. Now, if you look at in the bottom left, there's clearly an increased outsourcing trend. However, given that the innovators are very, critical in terms of the IP protection, still, I would say the outsourcing in China or India, it's between 15 to 20%, and the majority of the outsourcing is still happening in the US or Europe. As we see this innovator gaining more confidence on the Indian companies with regard to IP protection, which we already started seeing that kind of trends, or some of the companies, in China who are global partners, we believe that probably the pie of this outsourcing towards Indian emerging market is likely to increase further. As you all know, and since Prashant spoke about this, that we do have a global emerging market fund. And as a part of that, we have this company, Biologics, which is the third largest, CDMO company in the world. And it's a very interesting case study. Like Biologics, maybe around 15 years ago, they started as a CRO player, and where they start offering the discovery services, particularly to small and emerging biotech pharma companies. But over time, they have successfully moved up the value chain, and today has become a fully integrated, CRO stroke CDMO players. And if you look at, as they have kept moving up the value chain, even their engagement with the customers, where in discovery services, probably the average revenue per molecule used to be $1.5 to $2.5 million, has now, for the commercial stage molecule, the average revenue per molecule has gone to $50 to $100 million. And that's what it has led to. 50% kind of compounded 5-year CAGR growth for the company from 2016 to 2022. And even despite such a higher base, company is very, very confident that they are likely to grow for another 35% CAGR over the next 4 to 5 years. Today, when you look at in terms of their client mix, 60% of the revenues comes from these small and emerging biotech pharma companies, with whom they started as a CRO player, and over time they have started supplying the manufacturing services, while the 40% of their clientele comes through large pharma companies. Now, why we believe that India has all the right ingredients in place, and probably as I was highlighting earlier, that we do see that CRDMO on the biologics side probably is going to be a significant growth opportunity for the Indian companies in times to come. Because when you look at in terms of talent, probably India produced the largest pool of engineering across the globe. And when it comes to in terms of the labor cost per hour, probably India being the cheapest. And not only this, I think there are two other inherent advantages what India offers is availability of large, diversified and treatment-need patient, and versus China, probably the ease of communication with the Western world. So we do believe that India has right ingredients in place, and probably the way like some of the Indian companies have moved up the value chain and today have become global competitive, whether you talk about fluorinations or you talk about small molecule, I think the biologics would be another area to look forward. Again, just putting things into from a Vitalk perspective, when we think about any investment, obviously we look at the two critical components or attributes, in terms of wherever the mix of these two facts are there, like in terms of great business and attractive valuations, those are the businesses which we would like to own. And when we talk about great businesses, there are three attributes which you look at. I'm not going to spend too much time out here, but maybe just to probably sum it up very quickly. One is the superior return on incremental capital, scalable long-term opportunity, and execution and governance DNA. And when you have all these three attributes in a company, it is very crucial to value it in a logical and robust manner, and buy it at a price which leaves substantial upside to the fair value. Just to highlight that when we talk about valuations, we don't focus on the traditional valuation multiple of P or EV beta. However, instead of looking at those multiple, what we focus is on our proprietary analytical framework, what we call OPCO-FINCO framework. Now, just to conclude, our sector investment framework is built on 4 key attributes, which help us to identify companies having superior return on incremental capital, scalable and sustainable growth opportunity, and create value for stakeholders. So any company, when we evaluate the companies, what we look for in terms of the mix of clientele, whether the company has a good mix of, emerging biotech pharma companies and the large biotech pharma company. And we would like to invest in the companies which works for the innovators versus for the generics, because the sustainability of the cash flow and the longevity of the cash flow is far higher when you're working with the innovator molecules, because there is a 15 to 20 year kind of duration for that molecule in terms of longevity. The second critical aspect which we look at in terms of, again, evaluating the companies in the CDMO space, again, the compliance, because manufacturing compliance, regulatory compliance are very, very critical. and your customer want you to have all those very good compliance track record and respect to their intellectual property, which I was highlighting. The third, what we have called is 2C way. That means the integrated business model where the company have a successful track record to provide services successfully both in CRO and CDMO, and hence obviously they offer the services as a one-stop solution. And last but not the least, that companies should able to address all the new modalities which are becoming critical, like ADS or oligonucleotides, peptides, or cell and gene therapy. So these are some of the key things which we look at. Just to put it together, we do believe that the relevance of India in the global outsourcing trend would improve, and early signs are clearly visible.